Welcome to a journey through the mists of time, where darkness and light intertwine, and the whispers of ancient spirits still echo in the wind. The story The Art of Necromancy in Antiquity will take you back to the times when people did not fear death, and the art of necromancy was the secret door connecting the living world and the underworld. This is not just a legend, but a mystical song about trade-offs, desires, and invisible powers that guide those who dare to cross the threshold of fate. Let each word lead you through the doors locked by memories, breaths, voices, looks. Until the final price. Are you ready to listen to the echoes from the other side of life, in the days when time flowed like silent rivers through the long night? When the moon had no name and the stars still whispered together about the secrets of darkness, on the edge of a forgotten kingdom there existed a hill as black as coal. The wind never sleeps there, and the land is so dry that it seems to have drunk every drop of life. The people around here call this place the Valley of 1,000 Whispers, because on moonless nights, the sound of the wind from the mountain crevices echoes like the voice of restless souls. Here, there was a man called Orath, the last of his lineage to practice the art of communicating with the dead, an art that was cursed, condemned by the king and the temple alike, but sought out by those who had lost loved ones in despair. Orath lived in a house of moss-covered green stone, with no windows, and only one entrance, an ebony door carved with strange spirals, symbolizing the cycle between life and death. That night, as dark clouds shrouded the sky like shrouds, Orath sat at a stone table. Before him was a black bronze bowl filled with water from an ancient well, and in the water was reflected not his own shadow, but blurry, moving images, contorted faces, misty eyes. Hands reaching out from nothingness. The light from the only oil lamp in the room trembled, as if afraid of what it illuminated. "You're here." A voice, not of a living person, rang out from the bowl of water. Orath closed his eyes slightly, his hands trembling slightly, but his lips curled into an almost affectionate smile. "I didn't call, and you came. What reason brought you back from the depths of the shadow world?" There was no answer, only a cold wind coming through the crack in the door, extinguishing the lamp. In the darkness, Orath's eyes opened, reflecting a pale white light like the light of bones under the moon. And from the corner of the room, a figure began to form, tall and thin. With long hair like smoke, her face hidden under a tattered shroud. The figure did not move, but drifted slowly toward the stone table, its voice like the last breath of a drowning man. "Someone comes to you tonight. He brings a gift from before your blood flowed in your veins." Orath sat still, listening like a thirsty man waiting for the first drop of water. He knew that omens from the soul never come alone, they are the shadow of an event creeping toward the present. He also knew that tonight might be the night when his ancient art would open its final door. That door, once opened, would never close. A knock sounded on the ebony door, slow as the heartbeat of a dying man. The shrouded figure melted into the corner like salt dropped into black water. Only a cold mist remained on the surface of a bronze bowl. Orath stood up, ran two fingers lightly over the swirls carved into the door, listening to the echo in the ancient wood as if listening to a curse that had lasted for generations. He unlocked it with a serrated whalebone key, and the door let out a somber sigh. The person standing outside was a woman in a coarse ash-colored woolen cloak, soaked with the night's rain. Her hair was braided into several braids, studded with pale sea stones like volcanic ash. In the moonlight that had just emerged from behind the clouds, her eyes were as cold as two slivers of tusk. She did not say hello, did not bow, she placed a long, narrow box, wrapped in faded animal skin, on the threshold. I have passed through 3 deserts, 7 rivers, and a forest where no birds sing, she said, her voice hoarse from the wind and sand. I bring to him who speaks with the dead a gift that belongs to the time before names. Orath tilted his head, studying the box as if it were a crack in the earth that might reveal a chasm. Your name? He asked. I brought no name here, she replied, for here the wind strips them away like dry bark. But if you need a word to call me Sethis. Orath took a step back, inviting her in. As the door closed, the wind and rain seemed to be forgotten outside, leaving a heavy silence. Sethis placed the box on the stone table, wiped his hands on the edge of his cloak, and untied the sinew that bound the lid. The lid opened silently, and a scent both strange and familiar rose up, the smell of freshly dug earth, of cold ashes, of blackened tree resin, and somewhere there was the scent of metal that had lain dormant under water for many years. Inside the box lay a roll of dark leather, as thick as rhinoceros hide, its surface engraved with intricate dots and curves like a swarm of dreaming ants. Orath did not touch the leather at once. He took a small bowl of gray salt from a wooden shelf, and sprinkled it in a circle around the box against the sun, muttering a phrase so ancient that even he did not fully understand its meaning. Whose hands has this been? He asked. When the salt had formed a closed circle. Those who have no bodies, and those who have bodies but have lost their souls on a stormy night, Sethis replied. I found him on the floor of a temple half swallowed by sand, where the stone pillars carved with fish eyes and snake scales looked at me like 1,000 eyes. The keeper of the temple was but a tongue of wind caught on a bell rope. Orath looked into her eyes, as if weighing the weight of her words. What do you want from me? I want to call someone, Sethis said, and her voice was no longer hoarse, but low, like rain-soaked silk. Someone lost in the border between curse and promise. I need his voice, or the shadow of his voice, if that is all that remains. Orath touched the bowl of black water. Ripples ran out in concentric circles, then took the shape of a waterfowl, flapping its wings in silence. The name is not needed, but the mark is, he said. Something that has drunk his sweat or tears. Sethis opened his fingers, revealing a silver ring as thin as a hair in a circle. In the lamplight, the ring did not glow, it only breathed cold. Orath took it with his fingertips and dropped it into the bowl. There was no sound. But in the depths of the bowl, the faces that had been blurred before suddenly shrank as if strangled by an invisible hand. It was not the ring that they feared, Orath knew, but the trace of the one who had worn it. He looked up. The one you want to call has gone too far, he said. Beyond the edge where my call is only the sound of moss on stone. Then call the edge, Sethis replied, his eyes unblinking. Or the guardian of the edge. I have brought this parchment in exchange. Orath looked at the scroll. The engravings on the leather were floating, as if they were changing shape. He breathed softly and opened it. The symbols appeared like stars born in the night, overlapping circles, intersecting curves, dots clustered like schools of fish. No words, no human figures. Only patterns pulsing like the heart of some giant sleeping creature. In the center of the scroll was a dark mark shaped like a teardrop, or a drop of dried blood over many seasons. This is not a text, Orath whispered, but a path. He pointed to the circles. Each circle is a season of death, each curve a change of wind in the land of whispers. And this dark drop is the price. Sethis touched the hilt of the small knife at his belt. And asked calmly, blood? No, Orath replied, laughing, not the kind of blood you can draw with metal. The price is something softer than a knife and heavier than a stone, memory. You must give a memory that, when it is lost, will make you different. Sethis was silent for a moment, long enough for a spider to spin another half-turn of web in a corner of the ceiling. Then she nodded. I have such a memory, she said. Of the scent of the first rains, of grass crushed by the feet of those fleeing a fire. But tell me, would a cliff keeper accept such a trade? The watchman of the cliff neither accepts nor denies, Orath said. I can only open the door. On the other side, you will speak. He rolled up the parchment, placed it in the middle of the table, and pulled down from the ceiling a cluster of bones as small as a bird's bones, shaking them gently. The bones rattled against each other, making a sound like hail on a ceramic roof. He smeared a thin layer of black resin on his forehead, then handed it to Sethis. She did not ask, but simply smeared a line across her own forehead, leaving a dark shadow like a fox's shadow across the snow. Orath lit 3 more oil lamps, placing them in a triangle around the table. His and her shadows overlapped, swaying on the wall like 2 tireless dancers. He poured water from the ancient well into a long-necked earthen gourd, and spoke a series of syllables that did not belong to any language breathing on the ground. As the words passed his lips, the room seemed to widen, then rise, then fall, narrow, as if folded by invisible fingers. Put your hand on the scroll, Orath said. Sethis placed her hand. The lines on her skin and the engravings on the scroll overlapped like 2 pieces of music coming to the same note. Orath placed the bronze bowl between them, and dropped the silver ring back into the water. Are you afraid? He asked, not looking at her. Yes, she said, her voice calm. But fear is a good horse, I know how to rein it in when necessary. Orath nodded, closed his eyes slightly, and began to call. He did not call the dead man's name, he called the wind that blew across the roof where he had looked up, he called the shadow at his feet on his last day of laughter, he called the smell of ashes on his hands that had held grain. He called the sound of his breathing as he slept on a mat spread before his door. Each word was a thread, and he weaved and weaved, until a vast field appeared on the surface of the water in the bowl. There was a red dirt road in the field. A man was walking. He was thin, with a slight stoop in his shoulders, as if he had carried many sacks of grain. But when he turned, his face was not visible, it was covered with a mist that smelled of salt. Sethis leaned closer, Orath heard her breathing catch. You saw, Orath said softly. But he did not hear. Hey! Sethis closed her eyes. She touched 2 fingers to her temples, and let out a long breath. In that moment, Orath saw a thin blue flash like a knife on her forehead, where the black tar had lain. The air in the room smelled of wet grass and early rain, the scent of earth after a fire had died, the sweat of survivors. Then it was all gone. Like a stream suddenly blocked. Sethis' eyes opened, deeper, harder. Something had left her and would never return. In the bowl of water, the man in the field stopped. He raised his hand as if to shield his eyes from a light that water could not describe. Then he spoke, his voice like a rope stretched between two old posts. "Who calls me from the sunless side?" Sethis wanted to answer, but Orath raised his hand to stop him. "No," he whispered. "Let me speak to the edge first." He lifted the gourd, and poured the water drop by drop into the three directions of the room, east, west, and north. The south he left empty. "You who watch the edge," he called, "you who count the steps that leave no trace, you who tie ropes around your necks that leave no words, listen and look. We bring you a roll of sugar and a drop in exchange." The wind did not blow, but the oil lamp swayed as if a hand had passed over it. A dark streak crept up the wall, stopping just above the bowl of water. Orath bowed his head, and this time Sethis did not speak. In the bowl, the red field faded, giving way to a steep black bank, like the shell of night. From the bank a shadow stepped out, not tall, not short, like the shape of a question without a period. "The exchange has been accepted," the shadow said. "The door opens for one word." "Just one." Orath leaned toward Sethis. She stood as straight as a spear driven into the earth. One word, and she would have no more. She looked at the person standing on the other side of the stone, not the person in the field anymore, but the meeting point where all paths converged and names were swallowed. She opened her mouth. "Where have you been?" she asked, each word a pebble dropped into cold water, while our oaths still lay beneath the olive tree. The stone was silent in the bowl. Then there was a sound like a finger tapping a dry clam shell. The shadow answered, "I go to the place where all oaths shed their skins and become wind. There I wait for a call that uses no words, only the scent of the first rain." Sethis closed her eyes, then opened them again, as calmly as if tying a tangled string. "I have returned the scent," she said. "Now return your voice." "The door opens for one sentence," the shadow said. But as soon as it spoke, the red path appeared again beside the cliff, like two pieces of land trying to slide over each other. The hunchback appeared, closer this time, so close that Orath and Sethis could see the calluses on his palms, the small cracks around the corners of his mouth. He did not look at them, he looked somewhere behind them, where the ebony door was as still as a sleeper. "I brought the ring," Sethis said, and since the door opened for one sentence, she did not turn the sentence into a question. The hunchback did not move. But the ring in the bowl of water quivered like a pricked insect. Orath felt a long, thin tug. Like a hair lifted from her shoulder by the wind. "It is not my ring," the other said finally. "It is a ring from the sea. I only borrowed it." Sethis took a half step back, her breath out of sync for the second time. Orath understood. She had brought what she thought was the other's bone, but it turned out to be only a piece of sea shell he had worn on one of his journeys. Yet it was not in vain, it was enough to open a gap in the precipice. "I need your voice to break a curse," Sethis said, now speaking to the stone before the grave. "The curse locks my door and binds the sleepers under their beds." "My voice," the other said, "is in the jar I buried under the third pillar of the temple with the snake's eyes. But the jar cannot be opened by the hand of a living man." Orath held his breath. The jar of voices, there were such places, he knew, in lands where the wind was trapped like a locust. Sethis listened without blinking. "Then how must it be opened?" "By a name that belongs to no living person," the shadow said, like a cliff keeper who had stepped into the answer. "Find that name where the tree has no leaves, the bird has no shadow, and the child has no cry." "And where is that place?" Orath asked, letting his voice intrude for the first time on the thin thread of the call. "In a city built of salt," the shadow said, and began to fade. "Salt holds tears, and sometimes voices." The oil lamp flickered, then flared higher, white. "In the bowl of water." The stone bank shrank into a thin black line, the red road cracked into mousetraps, and then all crumbled into tiny specks like pearl dust. The ring stopped vibrating. Orath dropped her shoulders, feeling the chill drain from her bones. Sethis stood there for a moment, as if listening to the distant hooves. Then she turned to Orath. "You heard," she said. "Do you know the way?" "I know how to ask things that know the way," Orath replied, picking the ring from the bowl and wiping it dry with an old cloth. "But the price of the next part will not be memory." He touched the scroll. "The road is open for a while. The next part goes through the city of salt. There, what falls from the eye returns to the eye in another form." "And what must I," Sethis asked, "pay?" Orath looked at her, longer than necessary. "A name," he said. "The name you did not bring." Sethis pursed his lips, then smiled as pale as the moon. "I abandoned my name after crossing the seventh river," she said. "For a name is a cauldron that attracts knives. But if the demand for a name is the price, then I will take a new one, and return it to the road, Sethis. Let it be bitten, chewed, and become food for toothless shadows." Orath nodded. "The name is given. The road receives." He rolled the scroll up and put it in the box. "We leave at dawn," he said. "The Salt City does not greet those who come in the night, and does not send them away at noon." "I do not sleep," Sethis said. "Tonight I will sit and watch the shadows you have invited." Orath did not smile. "Tonight," he said, "is not the night that the shadows come. Tonight is the night that the shadows eat." Near dawn, the rain stopped. The Valley of Whispers spread out in the gray sky like a beast fresh from the mud. Orath carried a burlap sack containing bird bones, powdered olive ash, 3 rusty nails, and a handful of black salt. Sethis carried only his small knife and the box containing the scroll. They walked along the hillside, skirting low thorn bushes with leaves like tired tongues. The path led them into a flat, white land. At first it looked like snow, but the more they walked, the salter it smelled. And the ground cracked like cracked breadcrumbs. It was a salt step, stretching to where the sky and the ground kissed in a cold straight line. In the middle of the step was a city without walls, only low blocks of buildings, all so white it hurt the eyes. The windows had no glass, just square black holes like the eyes of wells. "Salt City," Orath said, softly, as if afraid the words would melt into the ground. "People don't speak loudly here." They entered the city without a greeting. The doors were ajar, and the rooms were empty. But at each threshold there was a small bowl of water, and in the water there were glistening fragments, fish scales, perhaps, dried laughter. Sethis didn't look at any of them for long. She walked as if she knew where she was going. At last they came to a square courtyard where a stone pillar stood in the center. First, Orath counted, then a second, a third. He stopped at the third. At the base of the pillar, salt had formed a ridge like a white scar. Orath knelt, took the knife from Sethis, and pushed the salt aside. Under the salt was dark soil, unsalty soil, secretive soil. He dug with his hands, his fingernails black with dirt. Sethis didn't help, just stood guard, his eyes darting around the square windows. When Orath's fingernails touched something hard, he exhaled. It was a small earthenware jar, its neck shriveled like a bird's, its body bulging. There was a line carved on it that ran like a maggot. There was no lid. Orath was in no hurry. He blew lightly on the jar's mouth, the sound echoing from within, neither deep nor shallow, like the sound of a room just big enough for a single speech to stand upright. "Do not open with the hand of a living person," he repeated. He took 3 rusty nails from his pocket, stuck them around the jar in a triangle, and sprinkled black salt on the top of each nail. "A name that belongs to no one living," he said, turning to Sethis. Sethis knew it was her turn. She stepped forward, took the box, took out the scroll, and opened it to the dark drop. She placed her palm on it and spoke softly a series of sounds that were not human, not wind, but like the sound of salt dissolving in water, the sound of disappearance. With each sound, 3 rusty nails rang like little bells. The black salt pulsated as if breathing, a snap, as light as a finger flicking a raindrop. From the mouth of the jar, a stream of cold air flew out, curling into a hair-thin thread. Sethis reached out, her hand trembling a little, and grasped the thread like silk. The cold air clung to her skin, seeped into her veins, and ran straight up her throat. She opened her mouth, but Orath put his hand on her shoulder. "Don't let it get into your lungs," he said. "Put it in the knife." Sethis understood, pressing the thread of air to the small blade. The blade dimmed, then glowed from within like a stone exposed to the sun and snow. As the light reached its fullness, the knife vibrated, producing a vibration that was not heard by the ear but by the bone. Sethis closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she spoke a word, a voice that was not hers, or not only hers. "Guardian of the cliff, open the second door." There was no door before them, but the salt plain suddenly had a long, straight, hair-thin crack. The crack stopped right in front of their feet. The wind blew up from below, so dry and salty that it brought tears to the eyes. Orath looked down and saw not earth below, but a stairway into darkness. "Down," he said, his voice unshaken. "But remember, down there, don't call each other by your given names." Sethis nodded, hiding the knife in his sleeve. They descended, each step as heavy as a mirror. The darkness wasn't completely dark, it was hazy, enough to see that the walls on either side were lined with transparent blocks of salt. In each block was something trapped, a breath, a call for mother, an unsaid laugh, a bitten cry. The whole staircase was a frozen orchestra. They descended into a large hall. In the middle of the hall was a shallow pool, filled with no water but fine salt powder, on the surface of which were crooked lines, as if someone had drawn with their finger and then backed away, leaving it unfinished. On the edge of the pool was a small black stone tablet, engraved with lines of varying length. Orath touched it lightly, listening with the skin of his fingers like a blind man reading a book. "This is where they keep the voices they intend to trade," he said softly. "And here is where one accidentally drops one's own voice." Sethis knelt beside the basin, looking at the marks in the dough. She placed her palm on it, not moving, just placing it. The salt dough trembled as if awakened from a dream. She drew out her knife, the blade still shining from within. "I do not want to awaken what is not mine," she said. "I have come to bring a voice back to its shadow." "Then call the shadow, not the name," Orath reminded her. Sethis inhaled, deeply, and blew on the salt. Her breath had no scent, the memory of the first rains was gone, so the salt separated not by scent, but by shape. A curve appeared in the pool, then two, then a void shaped like a jar. In the center of the void was a black dot, as small as an ant's eye. "That's the hole to tie the thread to," Orath whispered, her eyes shining for the first time. "Tie the thread to the shadow follows the thread." Sethis took a small braid from her hair, untied the pumice stone, and pulled out the longest strand of hair. She dropped the end of the strand into the black dot. Nothing happened. She was undaunted. She brought the knife close to the strand. Letting the light of the voice in the knife touch the strand. This time, the strand contracted as if it had met fire, then stretched like a bowstring. A gentle tug tugged at her hand. Sethis tied the other end of the strand around her wrist. "Are you sure?" Orath asked. "If the voice finds this wrist weak, it can break it," Sethis replied. "If it wants to come back, I will give it away." The hair began to slide, as silently as a water snake. It pulled Sethis toward a salt wall in the corner of the hall. There was one block there that was clearer than the others, and inside, Orath saw a figure holding his voice, literally, the lips pressed together, hands clasped around his throat as if afraid the voice would break. "Don't touch," Orath said. He took a handful of olive ash and sprinkled it around the block, tracing a circle that didn't quite close. "Shadows hate perfect circles," he muttered. "Give them an exit, an entrance, and a place to forget." Sethis laid the blade against the block, not poking, just pressing. The blade was neither hot nor cold, but heavy as a promise of many years. The salt began to crack, the cracks running like trees on a winter lake. A crack opened, just big enough for a hair to pass through. As the hair entered, the figure inside turned. It had no eyes, but it looked straight at where Sethis stood. "I'm coming back," she said, her voice this time borrowing no one's voice, but her own bones. "If you remember the red path and the shadow of the olive tree, follow this line." The figure let go of its neck, its hands fell. An invisible thing, his voice, rolled away like a pebble pushed off a ledge. It followed the thread, through the slit, out. When it touched the blade, it vibrated like a newly restrung instrument. Sethis felt pain in his wrist, but did not let go. Orath, standing behind, put his hand on her back, not to hold, but to remind each vertebra of its position. When the voice had entered the knife, the slit closed with a dry sound like two stones kissing. The hair fell, breaking into fine dust, joining the salt powder at his feet. Sethis collapsed. His hands on the edge of the pool, breathing hard. Orath knelt after her, his hand on her wrist, her pulse pounding, like someone running through the night. "Done," he said. But not done. Above them the ground rumbled like a drum beaten with a big hand. The salt city shook ever so slightly, enough for the voices trapped in the walls to jingle. Orath looked up. "The watchers of the cliff smelled it," he said. "They don't like people carrying voices beyond their shores." "Let's go," Sethis said, standing, his knife still shining. "The way up is never as long as the way down." They climbed quickly, the steps growing longer under their feet. When they reached the mouth of the rift, the sky had stood still, neither morning nor noon, for a moment in between, when shadows were uncertain whether to grow longer or shorter. They stepped out onto the salt plain. In the city, the square windows were still black. In each bowl of water at the threshold, the water was as flat as a dead man's eye. Orath and Sethis did not look back. They followed the same path, past the third, second, first stone pillar, through the courtyard, through the shadowless alleys. As they reached the edge of the city, the wind picked up, carrying salt grains as fine as needle dust. "Wait," Orath said, pausing. He turned toward the city, put 2 fingers to his lips, but did not whistle. He blew into a void. The void went into the city, drifting through the windows, pouring into the bowls. Some of the bowls made a very soft sound, like the rattling of tin can lids. Orath bowed, his thanks not in words, but in the shape of his spine. "So they know," he said, "that we have not come to rob, but to exchange." Sethis touched the blade to her palm, just enough to cool the skin. "I will take this voice to the temple with the snake's eyes," she said. "There, under the third pillar, I will return it to the shadow that waited for it." "And when you pay," Orath said, "the curse in your house will separate like salt in water. But the watchers of the cliff will not spare. They demand something at the end of the path." "Which end?" Sethis asked, like a forester asking the end of a vine. "Your own end," Orath replied, looking straight into her eyes. "One day, when the rains return, you will no longer know the smell of them. Not because you have paid the memory, that has already happened, but because you will become someone who no longer stands in the rain." He turned away, walking on. "We must pass through a forest where no birds sing." Sethis walked beside her, not slow, not fast. As they left the salt plain, their footsteps left faint trails that were licked clean by the wind. The blade under her sleeve lost its shine, returning to its old metallic color. But sometimes, when she breathed, a very small sound struck the edge of her tongue like a heart learning to remember. At the edge of the valley, before the afternoon had settled, they stopped at a large rock. Orath opened his bag, took out 3 rusty nails and a handful of black salt, and buried them in the rock like a sower. "So that the path remembers," he said. "Tomorrow, the forest will wave its arms with leafless branches." Sethis sat down, leaned back against the rock, and closed her eyes for a long moment. In the silence that clung to her ears, she heard a voice very thin, very deep, like a thread pulled from a skein of cloth. It did not say her name, nor anyone else's, but said a short sentence, like someone greeting a stranger at a well, "I have heard." She opened her eyes and looked at Orath. He was sitting with his back to her, but his shoulders were straight as a bow. They said no more. The night came, light and not wet. The stars emerged from dark pockets in the sky, looking down like silent fish swimming in a deep pond. Somewhere far away, a 2-stringed instrument began and died, like someone accidentally touching his dream, and before sleep came, Orath whispered, to no one, "The third door will not be opened by salt, nor by memory. It will demand what neither the living nor the dead will give." He did not say what it was. Because sometimes, not naming a thing is the only way to keep it from finding you first. The next dawn was a pale streak of ash that wrapped around the horizon. No brilliance, no promise. Orath and Sethis left the big rock and followed the gray thread-like path across the hillside. Before them, the forest appeared, but it was not a forest of leaves, nor a forest of velvety darkness. It was a forest of bare, towering branches, thrust into the sky like 10,000 bone spears. Not a leaf. Not a bird. Not a speck of moss clinging to the trunks. The ground beneath their feet was dry and spongy, dotted with bits of broken seed pods, as if someone had eaten them in a distant season. As soon as Sethis took her first step into the forest, she felt a silence as heavy as lead. All sound had disappeared, the wind, the footsteps, even her own breathing. Only the pounding of her heart remained in her skull. Orath walked ahead, her back straight, her hands clasped tightly around a cloth bag of bird bones and black salt. He stopped under a bow-shaped branch, looking up at the torn sky. "Here," he said, his lips moving but the sound only coming from inside Sethis' head. All speech is muffled by the tongue. "The third door is hidden somewhere among the nameless trees." They walked deeper, counting their steps along the stumps, carved like knife marks on old skin. Each stump had its own incisions, irregular, but Orath read them like a star map. He touched the incisions, felt their depths, their shallowness, and nodded. "They lead to a void," he said. "A void where there is nothing, and it is there that the living and the dead will claim what they do not want to give." Sethis did not ask what it was. She only tightened her grip on the blade, now muted by the light of her voice. But still cold with salt. The path narrowed, branches reaching in on either side like withered arms trying to block their progress. The ground beneath their feet turned black as if licked by fire, but there was no smell of smoke, only the smell of old ash mixed with the smell of rust. They stopped before a real clearing, a circle in the middle of the forest, where no trees grew, only a stone slab protruding like the back of a hibernating animal. On the stone were carved 3 concentric circles, each connected by a straight cut, forming the shape of an open eye. In the middle of the eye was a deep hole, small enough to fit an arm through. From the hole emanated an unusual cold, not the cold of ice, but the cold of the void, the cold of a place where no light had ever touched. Orath knelt beside the stone, took a handful of black salt from his pocket, and sprinkled it around the edge of the hole. "This is the place of the silent guardian," he transmitted to Sethis. "Unlike the cliff keeper, this one does not count steps, does not tie ropes. He keeps what neither the living nor the dead will give, the last breath." Sethis frowned slightly. "If it is the last breath. From whom?" "From you," Orath replied, still looking down into the hole. "Not to die, but to pay the price. Every man who passes through here must leave behind a breath that, if lost, will never be breathed again in the same way." She understood. The last breath of a moment that does not repeat itself, like the breath when you first see the sea. Or when you realize you have come home. Without it, you still live, but there will always be an empty room in your heart. Have you chosen? Orath asked. Sethis nodded slightly. "I chose my breath. The first time I heard him call my name without words." Without another word, she knelt beside the hole and inhaled deeply. The air of the forest was odorless, tasteless, but heavy, as if drawn from stone. She held her breath for a long moment, then bent down and let it all flow into the hole. A thin mist emerged, swirling around the circle carved into the stone, then sinking to the ground. Suddenly, the stone shook, the 3 circles blurred, and from the hole came a sound like someone else's heart beating. The earth before them split open, opening into a narrow tunnel that slid down into darkness. Orath stood, holding out his hand to her. "The third door," he said in her mind. "Here lies the unspoken words buried alive." They descended, and the chill grew with each step. The walls of the tunnel were neither earth nor stone, but a waxy substance, pale yellow and pliable, but within each cell were small, sealed vapors, swirling slowly as if searching for a way out. Sethis looked around. Each vapor was a different color, silver gray, turquoise, pale red. And she knew that color was the scent of the moment the breath belonged to. Some trembled as they passed, as if recognizing the person who had once owned them. At the end of the tunnel, a large room opened. In the middle of the room was a long dark wooden table, on which were arranged hundreds of small glass bottles, each containing a thin wisp of vapor coiled like a thread. Behind the table was a figure, tall, thin, with long hair like wisps of smoke, a face without eyes, nose, or mouth, just a blank space. But from it emanated a clear feeling. Silence had taken shape. Orath and Sethis stopped a few paces from the table. The figure did not move, but a thought entered their minds, clear and deep. "What have you brought in exchange?" Orath placed the cloth bag on the table, opening it to reveal bird bones, olive ash, and rusty nails. "We want the way to the temple with the snake's eyes, through the path no one remembers," he replied in his mind. Here is your offering. The figure shook its head slowly. No earthly things. I only take breath. Sethis stepped forward, opening her hand. I have returned the last breath of a moment to your door, she said in the other's mind. Lend me a breath that can unlock that temple. The void in the figure's face swirled slightly. Like a well waking. He bent over the table, selected a dark green vial, and placed it before Sethis. This breath belongs to one who has seen the sun die and still sings, the wordless voice said. It will open any locked door with the shadow of light. Sethis took the vial, a cold feeling running down her arm. Orath nodded, knowing they had the key. But as she turned away, the figure added, when you use this breath, a moment of you will disappear from your own memory. You will not know what you have lost. Sethis did not turn around. Every path claims a part of the one who walks it, she replied. I am used to it. They left the room, following the tunnel back to the stone. When they emerged into the dim light of the forest, Orath turned and carved 3 crosses into the trunk of the nearest tree. To remember, he said. Or to forget in an orderly way. Sethis looked at the vial in her hand, thinking silently of the snake-eyed temple and the curse that still bound her home. The path ahead was open, but she knew, deep in her bones, that every step closer to her goal was also a step away from herself. As they continued, the forest thinned, revealing strips of land red as dried blood. In the distance, stone pillars carved with scales and eyes, the temple had been there, waiting for them like a dry well waiting for the first raindrop. The snake-eyed temple stood on a high mound, surrounded by steep rocks like the teeth of an ancient beast. Each pillar was carved with round eyes, vertical pupils like snake's eyes, and the layers of scales glinted green in the gray sky. Every eye seemed to be looking, but not at Orath or Sethis, but through them, into the deepest fragments of their memories. The path leading up to the mound was a series of worn stone steps, between the cracks sprouting dry grass as yellow as finger bones. The air grew thicker as she climbed, as if it contained something that did not want to be named. Sethis clutched the dark green glass jar, the cold feeling from it seeping into her veins like the water of a river in the thawing season. Orath walked ahead, still holding the offering bag, his eyes scanning the stone pillars, mentally counting the order of the carvings. This temple was not built to be worshipped, he said softly, but the words echoed only in her head. It was built to be kept. And what it holds does not want to be set free. The door to the temple was a single slab of stone. Without hinges, without gaps, carved only with the image of a serpent, its body coiled 3 times, its head raised, its eyes hollow and empty. The coils of the serpent were identical to the concentric rings on the stone slabs in the bare branches forest. Sethis understood, this was the lock, and the breath in the jar was the key. She stepped forward, kneeling before the door. The stone was cold. She lifted the jar to her lips and unscrewed the lid. As soon as it was lifted, a dark green vapor rose, thick and slow like smoke from a snuff torch. The vapor curled into a circle, then crept into the snake's empty eyes. The stone shook. From the crevices, a deep, drum-like sound rang out. Slow but relentless. The coils of the snake on the door began to move, tightening, then loosening, as if untying themselves. Each release revealed a vertical crack in the stone. Dark green light seeped into the crack, shining deep inside. "The door is open," Orath said, his voice low. "But we don't know who or what will come out first." The crack widened. There was no wind, no mechanical noise, only the feeling of two pieces of night being torn apart. From inside, a cold air as thick as night dew rushed out, hugging their flesh. Sethis stepped in first, without hesitation, the blade hidden under his sleeve ready. Orath followed closely, his eyes never leaving the walls. Inside the temple was a long corridor, the black stone walls carved with small snake eyes, hundreds, thousands of them, all looking down at the path they took. With each step, Sethis felt something measuring his heartbeat, remembering every breath. The blue light from the borrowed breath still lingered in the air, illuminating the mysterious cracks in the ground, some of which looked like pits covered by thin slabs of stone. At the end of the corridor was a large room, the ceiling as high as the bottom of a dry well. In the middle, a stone pedestal, and on the pedestal was the earthenware jar that the thin, hunchbacked man had mentioned. The jar was no bigger than an arm, its neck wrapped 3 times around a dry animal skin strap. On the side of the jar was a carving of a snake coiled around a hollow circle. Sethis stepped forward, but Orath stopped her. "This is where the curse will test you," he said. "The jar contains a voice, but this voice is bound with something you cannot see." She looked closely. There was no lock, no visible incantation, but the air around the jar seemed thicker, distorting the light. Sethis understood the curse's bindings, how to cut it. She asked. Orath opened the bag, took out 3 rusty nails, arranged them in a triangle around the stone pedestal, and sprinkled black salt on each one. "The salt will keep the string from escaping," he explained. "And your knife, it still has the borrowed voice. Let that voice call out the string." Sethis drew the knife, placing the metal blade against the jar. She said nothing, only letting the vibrations inside the knife spread. Immediately, the air around the jar moved, hair-thin, transparent strands slowly materialized, wrapping around the neck of the jar, tightening like tiny snakes. She took a deep breath, remembering how she had opened the salt rift in the White City, and then lightly touched the blade to one of the snakes. There was a small cracking sound, not the sound of metal, but the sound of a string of memory being snapped in two. The transparent snake retracted, dissolving into nothingness. She continued with a second, a third. Each time, a different scent passed by: the sea, ash, rotting leaves. Perhaps it was the scent of those who had come here and never returned. As the last thread was cut, the jar vibrated, emitting a low sound. Sethis placed her hand on it, feeling the warmth inside, like the beating heart of a small creature. She untied the leather strap and opened the lid. A warm stream of steam rose from it, swirling around her, then into the blade, making it glow again, not blue this time, but a deep gold like the late afternoon sun. Orath nodded. "The voice has returned to its shadow," he said. "Now, the curse on your house will begin to crack." But then a noise echoed from deep within the temple walls. It sounded like hundreds of claws scraping against stone, getting closer and closer. The snake eyes etched into the wall began to blink, slowly, but steadily, and all turned toward them. Sethis tightened her grip on the knife. "You're right," she whispered. "We didn't come out first." From a large crack in the wall behind the pedestal, a long shadow slithered out. It wasn't a snake, but it wasn't a person either, its body covered in black scales, its hands like human hands but with sharp claws, its head faceless, just a deep darkness. Every time it moved, the snake eyes on the wall blinked faster, as if inhaling in time with it. Orath took a step back, his voice stern. "That's the one who keeps the last word, the one who will take the price that hasn't been paid." Sethis raised the knife, the deep gold light illuminating the darkness above its head. She knew, this was the last step to leave the temple. But it might also be the step that would keep her from ever bringing the word out. The darkness where the creature's face should have appeared was slippery, untouched by eyes. But Sethis knew, it was looking straight at her, not with eyes, but with a void that could suck in her breath. The room was so quiet that Sethis could hear his own heart, each beat counted. Orath stepped aside, his hand still near the bag of offerings, but he did not draw anything. He knew this encounter was not for him. The last voice holder crept forward, his long body scraping against the stone, making a sound like an overstrung bowstring. With each shift, the air grew colder, as if the heat were being sucked from Sethis's blood. A voice spoke, not from its mouth, but from within her own chest. "Your voice is that of one who has left the edge. But when you pass through this door, every voice must pay." Sethis held the blade across her chest, its golden light spreading out, cutting a thin line into the thick darkness of the room. "What do you want?" she asked, but did not speak, only dropped the question into the mind of the person opposite. A voice for a voice, the voice replied. "Give me the voice you treasure most." She understood immediately, not a voice, but the most precious moment of sound in her life. It could be the call of the person she had been searching for, or the laughter of a night that would never return. But if she took it away, she would never remember that sound, no matter how many seasons she lived. Sethis did not answer right away. She thought of the waves crashing against the hull of the boat on its first voyage, the soft breathing in her ear on a long night, the wind coming through her window before the curse struck. Finally, she chose. She dropped the tip of the knife to the stone floor, letting the metallic sound echo softly in the room, and in that moment, she pulled the choice from her memory. A salty sound. The smell of sea salt filled her mind before it faded. The last one stopped. From the darkness above it, a black vapor split, and entered her blade. The golden light flared. Brighter, then steady like a flame that had found the wind. "The debt is paid," the voice said one last time. "Take this voice away from here before the eyes on the wall open." Orath stepped forward, not saying a word, but his hand was firmly on her shoulder. They turned their backs to the stone platform and walked out into the corridor. At that moment, the snake eyes on the wall began to open fully, their pupils standing straight, a deep blue light pouring from each eye, clinging to their feet like cold streams. Orath took a handful of black salt and sprinkled it along the path. The blue light touched the salt and went out, like coal meeting water. They walked faster, breathing heavily. As the snake door appeared ahead, Sethis raised his knife, letting the golden light shine on the empty eyes on the stone. The snake carved on the door coiled, then dissolved into bright dust. The light from outside, ash-gray but free, rushed in, breaking the heavy, stone-like air in the temple. They stepped out onto the mound. As soon as their feet left the last stone step, the door behind them closed with a low undercurrent. All was silent, save for the wind on the distant step. Sethis stood still for a moment, her hand tightening on the hilt of the knife. Inside it, she felt the voice of the one from the brink, clear now, heavy and alive, like a stone at the bottom of a well. Orath looked at her, his eyes not searching but considering his next course of action. "Now," he said, "you can break the curse at home. But remember, every voice from the brink is bound to its shadow. Someday, the shadow will find it again." Sethis nodded. "When that day comes, I will have my knife." They turned away from the mound, heading back toward the Valley of Whispers. In the distance, dark clouds gathered, foreboding rain, but to Sethis, the scent was as distant as a tale from another lifetime. The afternoon sun was bathed in a silvery light, the clouds rolling like morning scarves from the mountaintops to the horizon. Orath and Sethis followed the old path back to the Valley of Whispers. The wind did not roar, but it crept through the crevices of the rocks like a whisper suppressed for centuries, following their every step. Sethis's house sat isolated on the edge of a low hill, surrounded by ancient olive trees. From a distance, Orath could see the shadow of the curse, wisps of smoke as fine as hair around the roof, black and thick, twisted like a spider's web. The door was closed, but not locked, for the curse was the key. Inside, every window was dark, and in that darkness lay motionless shapes, as if touched and forgotten. Sethis stood before the door, knife in hand. The golden glow of the voice within the blade was no longer as bright as it had been in the temple, but shrunk, darker, like a heart settled in its chest. She looked up at the roof, where the wisps of smoke tightened as they sensed her return. Orath set the offering bag on the ground, took out a handful of black salt and sprinkled it in a circle around the threshold. "The salt keeps the voice from falling when you call upon its shadow," he said. "Once the shadow receives the voice, the curse must be released." Sethis nodded, stepping into the circle of salt. She knelt, placing the tip of the knife close to the ground. Closed her eyes. Inhaled deeply. Then she let the voice within the knife flow out, not through her mouth, not through any words, but through a long, full breath, like the wind searching for a valley it had forgotten. A dark golden light poured from the tip of the knife, flying in thin threads, through the cracks in the door, through the keyholes, into the roof. Immediately, the black smoke vibrated, writhing like a burned snake. A faint sound, not human, not animal, rang out from inside the house, like the groaning of wood when ice melts. The door swung open. From inside, a figure stepped out. It was the thin, hunchbacked man from the red fields, but this time the face was no longer covered by the mist. It was the face of a man who had lived through both sun and storm, eyes as deep as dry wells. He looked at Sethis without smiling, but there was something in his eyes that made the black smoke crumble into flying ash. "You called me," he said, and this time it was true, the sound coming from his lips and into her ears. "My voice has returned." Sethis lowered the knife. "And the curse?" He looked back at the house. The shadows that covered the walls and roof shrank, dissolving into fine dust carried by the wind. In the doorway, the previously motionless shapes swayed, then vanished, as if they had never existed. The interior was bright, though the sun was still hidden behind the clouds. The curse was only a rope that held me outside, he said. Now it is broken. But in return, you have tied another rope to yourself. Sethis did not ask which one. She knew it was the thread that bound her to this man's shadow, the one that would pull them together again, on the edge or somewhere deeper. Orath stepped into the house, his eyes scanning the dark corners. Nothing is held here, he affirmed. Then he looked at Sethis. But the fourth door is open somewhere along the path you took. Sethis closed her eyes for a moment. For a moment, she heard, far away, faintly, the sound of something beating. Not a heart, not a drum, but a waiting sound. What will the fourth door demand? She asked. Orath did not answer immediately. He went out onto the porch, looking down at the valley, which was bathed in the silver of dusk. Not a memory, not a breath, not a voice. This time, it will demand something that, if it is lost, you will no longer recognize yourself in the mirror. Darkness began to creep through the olive fronds. In the dim light, the face of the hunchbacked man was no longer clear, but his eyes were still bright as deep water. He spoke slowly, as if letting each word sink into the ground. When the fourth door opens, remember. Not all shadows want to return to where they came from. That night, the wind blew up from the valley, cold and dry, carrying the scent of worn stone and old roots. Orath did not sleep, nor did Sethis. They sat by the charcoal stove in her house, the red glow smoldering on the walls. Making the small shadows move as if whispering to each other, the hunchbacked man, no longer a shadow, sat across from them, holding an empty earthenware cup in his hand, as if to hold on to a warmth that had never been there. He looked at Sethis, his eyes reflecting the charcoal. You want to go on to the fourth door, he said, his voice hoarse as burnt wood. But no one will show you the way. It will find you, when you take one wrong step and keep going. Orath looked up. How wrong? The other laughed, not quite happily. As wrong as one who seeks the light without knowing he is standing in it. Sethis kept silent, but inside, she knew the words were a sign. The previous doors, memories, breaths, voices, she had entered when she was ready. But this one would not wait for her to be ready. They left the house at dawn. The sky was the color of polished steel, the edges of the clouds red as old blood. The thin, bent man did not go with them, but stood in the doorway watching. When you see your shadow not moving in the same direction as your body, he said to Sethis, know that you are near. The path led them over rocky hillsides, through a ravine where the wind blew hollowly. By noon they had reached a flat expanse of white sand, sparkling like salt but not salty. There were no trees here, no rocks, only footprints, hundreds, thousands, running in every direction, but all disappearing abruptly into a blur in the air. Orath knelt down and touched a footprint. Not heavy, not light. Not of a living person, he said. But not quite dead either. Sethis looked in the direction the footprint disappeared. She saw something like a watery surface between the sky and the earth, not shaking, not reflecting, but blurring everything behind it. The door? She asked. Orath shook her head. No. It's a curtain. The door is behind it. They stepped inside. It was cold, like diving into a deep river in the middle of the ice. Sethis' eyes darkened for a moment, then opened to a space with no sky, no earth, just an endless gray void, and floating pieces of mirror. Each mirror reflected an image of her as a child. Her standing in a sandstorm, her sleeping by the fire, her sitting by a dead bird. And one, lying diagonally away, reflected her holding a knife in a deep golden light, but the eyes in the mirror were not hers. Orath stood behind her, his voice echoing as if from far away, "The fourth door is not made of stone or wood. It is made of your own shape, and the key is what you are willing to give up to not be yourself." Sethis moved toward the mirror. The reflection smiled, raising the blade to eye level. "What will you give me to open the way?" The reflection asked, but her lips did not move. The sound went straight to her bones. She thought of all the things she had given, her memories, her breath, her voice. Now, what remained was the thing that bound them all into a single shape, her own face. "What do you want?" she asked. The mirror tilted its head. "Your gaze," it replied. "Take away the way you see the world, and you will no longer be the one who enters here." Orath did not intervene. This was a choice only for her. Sethis closed her eyes, remembering the first time she saw the sea, the first time she saw blood, the first time she saw the eyes of the hunchback. All would become empty if she let it. But that empty space could open the way. She opened her eyes, nodded. "Take it." The mirror placed the tip of the knife against her forehead. She felt no pain, only a faint rumble, like an old string being pulled. The world before her changed color, less sharp, less dark, as if covered with a thin layer of mist. The mirror retreated, dissolving into bright dust, and the mirror shattered soundlessly. Behind, the space opened into a narrow path leading deeper, the dim light from within inviting. Orath stepped beside her, his eyes lingering on her face, as if noticing the change, but he said nothing. "The door is open," he simply said. "And it won't be long." They stepped into the narrow passageway, the walls on either side of them woven with dense smoke. With each step, the smoke quivered, making a faint sound like clothes drying in the wind. The space inside was unfathomable. Sometimes the corridor seemed to go on forever, sometimes an opening was reached in a blink. Sethis felt the change first, not in her hands, not in her feet, but behind her eyes. The world before her was dull and dark, everything appeared in blurred outlines, and each outline seemed to vibrate, live, breathe. She understood that this was the price she had paid. She had lost her sight. Now, instead of seeing things as they had seen them, she saw them as they knew themselves. Orath walked close by, his eyes still fixed forward. "You will see things I cannot," he said, his voice even, "and you will no longer see things I see." The corridor led to a gate made of two tall stone pillars, with no doors, just the space between them. Beyond them stretched a vast expanse of land, colorless. A mixture of gray and silver, shimmering like the surface of a lake torn to pieces by the wind. In the middle of the expanse was a huge circle of stones, each standing upright like a tombstone. On the top of each slab, there was an indistinct symbol carved, a circle, a curve, or a half-broken crescent. In the middle of the stone circle, there was nothing, or rather, there was a gap so deep that one would fall into it. Sethis stopped at the edge of the circle. From the gap, a sound echoed, like a distant conversation, but none of it made sense. She did not listen with her ears, but with the part that had just been taken away, the sight that had now transformed into another feeling. Orath stood behind her, speaking in a low voice. The fourth door opens not for us to pass through, but for what is beyond. Are you ready? She did not answer. Her hand tightened on the knife, and the dark gold inside the blade flickered once, as if in response to the gap. From the center of the circle, a shadow began to rise. At first it was like smoke, then it thickened, taking the shape of a person. But not a single person, it was a composite of many figures, the broad shoulders of one, the hands of another, the long eyes of another, and the strange scars. Each time it moved, the pieces changed, as if it had borrowed the bodies of all the people who had passed through here and never returned. When it spoke, it felt like 100 voices were whispering into Sethis' mind, "You have passed through 3 doors. Memories, breath, voice. Now you come here with a vision that is no longer your own. I ask, what is left to hold on to?" Sethis tightened his grip on the hilt of his knife. "I have this knife. And the path." The composite was silent for a beat, then all the voices spoke again. "The knife cuts only the outside. The path leads only to the place you have chosen. But this door demands the last thing, your intention." Orath glanced at her. "If you give me your intention, it means that every step after that will no longer be up to you." The shadow took a step forward, its feet not touching the ground. "Give me your intention, and I will let you go to the last place of the voices that have called you since day one." Sethis did not speak immediately. In her heart, this intention was not just to find someone, or to break a curse, it was also the thread that kept her connected to herself. If she gave it away, she would be a person who walked without knowing why. But she also knew, if she did not give it away, the door would close, and all that had been given would be a meaningless loss. She took a breath, the gold and the knife vibrating. "If I give the intention, what will I replace it with?" The shadow replied, all the voices blending into one, "You will get the answer. And the answer will find its way to you." Orath frowned slightly, but did not dissuade her. This was a deal that only she could make. Sethis stepped to the edge of the gap, looking into the bottomless abyss. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, let go of the thinnest thread she had held in her hand since the beginning of the journey, her reason to continue. A chill ran through her body, but it did not hurt. When she opened her eyes, the gap before her had become a passage, not earth, not stone, but a long bridge of gray light, leading deep into the darkness. The shadow retreated, a voice echoing as if from the end of the long corridor, "You are no longer the one who entered here. Now go, and do not look back." Sethis stepped onto the bridge, Orath close beside them. The gray light lifted them like waves lifting a boat. With each step, behind them, the stone circle slowly closed, and the symbols on the top of the stone began to glow. At the end of the bridge, darkness opened up, but not empty darkness, but darkness that breathed, slowly, deeply, like a giant creature that had been waiting for them for a long time. They stepped into the darkness, and immediately the world around them lost all boundaries. There was no more up or down, front or back, just a floating space, where every step felt like treading on the surface of an invisible lake. Sethis felt that this darkness was not trying to hide itself, but was quietly pressing in, like a hand wanting to touch the back of her neck. It was not cold, not hot, but had the temperature of a living breath, a giant breath. Each time it entered and exited, the space vibrated slightly like a violin string. Orath walked beside her, eyes narrowed, but she realized that he too was beginning to lose his bearings. Here, there was nothing to hold on to, nothing to look at. And then, from the depths of the darkness, a pale phosphorescence rose, forming veins like veins that spread across the space. A voice rang out, not from one direction, but from all directions at once. It was as soft as a lullaby, and as sharp as a knife cutting through silk. You who have abandoned your intentions, you who have abandoned your memories, your breath, your voice, and your gaze. You have almost paid for everything. I ask, what have you come here to seek? Sethis did not answer immediately. Inside, she searched for a word, but found only the void where the intention had been. There was no reason, no goal, but there was a next step. She spoke softly, to no one. I came because the path still exists. The darkness breathed deeper, and from the glowing lines, images began to emerge: a red field, a lone olive tree, silver waves, and a man's face, thin and stooped, but younger, with brighter eyes, as if he had never known the edge. You have brought back his voice, but not him, the voice continued. For that, you must pay the ultimate price. Orath tightened his grip on her shoulder. Listen to me, he said, his voice showing the tension for the first time. The ultimate price means something no one can take back from you. Not a part of you, but all of you. Sethis looked into the darkness, at the passing images. Then, what if I don't pay? The voice replied, without hesitation, then every door you've opened will be closed forever. Every sound, every shadow, every path will be erased as if it had never existed. The space swayed slightly, like a boat touching an underground vortex. Sethis understood, this was the final turn. There was no fifth door, no turning back. She opened her hand, the dark gold blade silently glowing, waiting for the command. In that moment, she realized, if she lost the whole you, she would become an empty form. But she could exchange it for a whole person. Orath still held her hand. If this step is wrong, there will be no more, he said. She looked at him, then into the breathing darkness. And she said, take me. At once, the darkness rushed in, not like a wind or a wave, but like a warm embrace. Sethis did not fall, but she felt herself being drawn away layer by layer, voices, shapes, the smell of skin, even nameless moments. They were separated from her, dissolved into the breath of the darkness. In the last moment, before she disappeared, she saw Orath standing there, not stopping, but his eyes, for the first time, gleaming with regret. Then everything went white, when Sethis opened her eyes, she was standing on the edge of a red field. The lone olive tree was still there. And in its shade, the thin, hunched figure, younger, sat, his eyes as bright as ever. He looked at her, but did not call her by name, did not ask who. Just smiled, as if he had been waiting for her for a long time. In the distance, Orath stood in the wind, his eyes on her, but he did not approach. The wind swirled around him, carrying a sentence she could only just catch: the door is closed. The road is over. In the shade of the olive tree, time seemed to stand still. The light was even, neither dawn nor dusk. The air smelled of damp earth and sap, as if it had just rained, but there were no drops on the leaves. The thin, hunched figure sat still, his dark eyes deep as wells. Sethis moved closer, each step leaving no trace on the ground. When she sat down across from him, the wind in the fields quieted, as if the whole world were listening. "You have come," he said. His voice was not exactly a sound, but a cool stream of water flowing straight into her mind. Sethis could not remember where she had come from, or why she had come to find him. The doors had opened, the prices paid. All remained like the fading sound of bells after a distant festival. She only knew that here, in the shade of this tree, every step had ended. "I don't know who I am anymore," she said, not expecting an answer. He smiled, placing a small object in her hand. It was a thin silver ring, a ring she had believed to be his, then known to be the ring of the sea. Now it was cold as dew, but as she touched it, she felt something very old return, not a memory, not an intention, but the feeling of a hand once clasping hers. "Enough," he said, "you have given everything, in exchange for this moment." She looked down at the ring, and knew that if she left the field, it would turn to salt in her palm. But she did not want to leave. At the far edge of the field, Orath stood still. He knew he could not enter the circle of olives. The fourth door had taken Sethis, and in return she had found another wholeness in a world that did not belong to the living. The wind swirled around his feet, carrying the scent of olive ash and black salt. In the bag, the remaining gifts fluttered, as if reminding him that there were other paths, other doors, for those who would come to him in the nights of despair. He turned and walked away, not looking back. For in the legends of the gatekeepers, if he turned, he would leave his shadow behind him, and one day, that shadow would call him back, not to open the door, but to walk through it, the red field, the olive tree, and the two figures beneath the leaves gradually faded into mist. No one knows whether they spoke again, or just sat there until the wind changed direction. But from that day on, in the Valley of 1,000 Whispers, on moonless nights, people heard a sigh mixed with the wind, warm and distant. The old people said, it was the voice of someone who had given himself to bring back another voice. The young people believed, somewhere behind the four doors, there was an olive tree that never shed its leaves, and under its shade, two figures sat silently looking at each other, forever. And Orath, the keeper of the art of summoning the dead, continued his journey, carrying this story like a secret never to be told, left to the wind to whisper to those who dared to listen. The storytellers of later centuries no longer knew Sethis' true name, nor were they certain whether Orath was real or just a figure woven from the fears and hopes of men. In taverns on the frontier, it was said that she was a traveler who sold pieces of her soul to the four doors, in exchange for a voice calling her from a place where no one would return. In the coastal lands, the legends changed. Sethis was the daughter of a family sworn to eternal silence, but she broke her oath to save a man. They said the olive tree in the story grew on an island no one had ever found twice, and the wind there carried a salty smell mixed with the scent of burning resin. The people of the Valley of Whispers whisper differently. Orath still lives, roaming the lands, opening his gates to those willing to pay the price. Some nights, when the wind whistles through the canyons, they hear the sound of knives and falling salt, and believe he is near. But if anyone calls his name, the wind dies, as if an invisible hand has silenced the curious. An ancient text says that the four gates are not places, but things a person must give up to reach his person: memories, breath, voice, sight, and finally, intention. When he gives them all up, he disappears from the map of the living, but finds a land where time does not pass. And like all legends, the story has no definite ending. In some regions, it is believed that Sethis and the one she found melted together like shadow and form, becoming part of the night wind. In others, it is said that Orath eventually found the olive tree, but did not step into its shadow, because he knew, if he did, there would be no one left to maintain the art of summoning the dead. So, whenever the wind through the ravine sounded like a sigh, the elders would remind the children, listen. But never answer. For once you answer, the path will come, and then the four doors will claim your portion.